Welcome, good evening. I'm John Walters, President and CEO of Hudson Institute. In my job, I frequently have the responsibility and the honor of introducing a variety of people coming to Hudson, high government officials from the United States and foreign countries, experts on backgrounds of various things that we work on, scholars, academics that have learning in a lot of the policy areas we work on. There are two great scholars here tonight, but they're also a pleasure for me to introduce because they're former colleagues from a time long, long ago when I was a young professor teaching at Boston College, and they're friends of both my wives and myself as teachers and colleagues. They're also teachers of Dr. Rachel Mackey, who runs our political studies program and is going to be the moderator for tonight's program. But they, Marc, Landy, and Dennis Hale also care about the United States, unlike some academics, I'll have to say, in other places in this day and age. And they care enough to have written a book about the ways we might defend the United States and its institutions at this critical time. This is a topic that, of course, is in some ways the topic of the Federalist Papers, is the topic of Lincoln's speeches, has been the topic of every great American leader at times of crisis. And so at a time of some crisis today, I think it's an important effort by two individuals who have plenty of things to do with their time to actually spend it on this kind of patriotic endeavor. So I want to personally thank them for doing that, and thank them for the generations of college young people that they have taught and taught properly and not improperly here. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over the program to Mrs. Rachel Mackey, who is, as I say, also a student of theirs and a former colleague. So she now, as many of you know who've been through it, runs our Hudson Institute Political Studies program, building on the education that they and others have given her and me. So this is kind of a payback and a pay forward. So thank you all for being here, and I'll turn it over to Rachel. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. As Mr. Walters mentioned, it's a real pleasure to get to introduce all of you to my own teachers, because I know them to be great teachers, and therefore it's an honor to get to share the kind of education they can provide with all of you. Professor Dennis Hale completed his undergraduate work at Oberlin College and received a PhD in political science from the City University of New York. He's taught at Boston College since 1978. Is a former department chair and was for several years the director of the undergraduate studies and director of the honors program in political science. He has published essays on local government, American political thought, public administration, and the modern experience of citizenship. He is also the author of The Jury in America, Triumph and Decline. Professor Marc Landy holds a PhD in government from Harvard University. He was the recipient of the 2009 Teaching Award chosen by the student members of the Boston College chapter of Phi Beta Kappa. His other books include Presidential Greatness, co-authored with Sidney Milkus, American Government, Enduring Principles, Critical Choices, and the Environmental Protection Agency, Asking the Wrong, co-authored with Marc Roberts and Steve Thomas. Please join me in welcoming Professors Hale and Landy. So, Keeping the Republic. Your title implies it might be lost. What do you think threatens it?
Okay, you're going to go first on that one?
I thought that was going to be you.
Oh, is that me? Oh,
I
that's
think
right,
it was
that's
you
me.
first, but
Keeping the
it could
Republic.
be either of you.
That's right.
You can study.
So, it's hard to keep a republic, right? I mean, that's just the bedrock fact about republics. They're hard to keep, especially massive republics, which are almost a contradiction in terms. And we worry, right? We wrote this book because we're very worried, because a big part of the intelligentsia is just making its hay attacking the Constitution. The first quote in our book is by these Hale, a Harvard and Yale professor, not a Hale, a Harvard and Yale professor, who say the Constitution is obsolete and cannot be redeemed. So they're even beyond reforming it. Throw it away. Well, it's fish wrapping. And that's just the most hyperbolic version of what is now a whole industry of constitutional criticism. Several famous law professors, political scientists. The New York Times, for some reason, has decided to make itself the house organ of this iniquitous operation. You'll have to explain. So with that going on at the intellectual level, and then you see all the difficulties emerging in our politics, right? A Congress that's dysfunctional, threats to local and state government from the feds. I could go on, but we really had to think through why we believe our constitutional order is indeed a brilliant way of dealing with the terrible problems that actually modernity causes, and Dennis will have more to say about that. So that's why we wrote the book.
Did you want to add anything, Professor Hale?
No, it's just one thing. This is a Constitution that was written for Americans. Right? You couldn't transfer it to Switzerland or Germany. Because each people have a certain set of characteristics, some virtues and some vices. And the framers were politically active people. They understood who their constituents were, and they didn't have any illusions about them. They were as good as God made them, and some of them were not very much better. So you have to have a constitution that can do two things. It can create a predictable framework for government, but it can also put up obstacles, barriers, hurdles to impulsive behavior, selfish behavior, factional strife, all of the things that happen when the people govern themselves. And this was the first time this has ever happened in a country as large as the United States.
That makes sense. You both talked about modernity in the answer to that question. And in the book, you talk quite a bit about the problems that modernity causes for constitutional orders. And Dennis, you just talked about writing for the people. Well, the people have obviously changed since the framing. So what are the particular challenges that modernity causes for the American constitutional order?
Well, I don't think they have changed. I mean, this is a country where people are rambunctious, they're impatient, they're mobile, they're ambitious, they have a lot of skills, they're enterprising, they like to get on in the world. They're not the Swiss. This came up in the convention a lot. Somebody would always say, well, why can't we be governed like the Swiss? And somebody finally got mad and
Now
said,
it's Sweden, right?
Yeah,
Sweden.
I think we still do that.
No more
Somebody said,
Switzerland, now it's Sweden.
enough with the Switzers. We cannot be like Switzerland. Switzerland is half the size of Virginia. So we are the first country, the first modern country that tried to create a popular government. And this is a little bit like trying to, invent the airplane while it's taking off, right? You have to have a government, and you have to have it in a reasonable amount of time, because the old system is not working. So over the summer, they hammered out this arrangement, a lot of compromises, a lot of failed possibilities. I think of James Madison. He liked the idea of a council of revision. I mean, imagine this. The members of the court and the president And they would get a chance to look at every piece of legislation coming out of the Congress and say yes or no. He loved this idea so much, he introduced it 3 times. 3 times it got defeated, and he finally gave up. So they had their own doubts about the possibility of a successful Republican form of government on the scale of an empire.
Yeah. Can I pursue that a little bit?
Of course.
Because you asked about specific attributes of modernity.
Yeah,
And
what is it about
you
modernity?
have to start with size and scale, right? We have students of the Greeks in the room, and we are huge. Even at the time of the framing, we were huge. Millions of people, stretching all the way from what today is Maine all the way down to Georgia. And of course, we had aspirations for expanding beyond that. Size measured in geography, size measured in population. There's never been a republic of a few million people before. Size, the particular attribute of size, which is incredible diversity, right? That's what Federalist 10 is all about. I mean, not as diverse as it is now, but in those days, Protestant sects didn't like each other. Okay, there weren't enough Catholics to worry about. But the different Protestant sects, different languages, German, English in particular, these are great problems. And national security is a great problem. It was a great problem. It was a terrible problem then when we were such a fragile little strip along the Atlantic. And of course, it has always been since a great problem. And you can't choose your approach, entirely your approach to national security. It's dictated largely by your enemies. So we can pretend that we're pacific and free and hate war, but we fight wars, and that's a tremendous mobilization of national power, dangerous national power. So these are things that we just have to face them. And so much of the writing in attacking the Constitution just wants to wish away these things. I think of Patrick Deneen's end of, and not even end of liberalism, failure of liberalism.
Why liberalism
Why
failed?
liberalism failed. And he celebrates the Amish. Well, I like the Amish. But are you really, can you really create a nation state, a modern nation state on the basis of the Amish?
Defense might be hard.
That might be hard.
Okay, so you've laid out all of the problems, all of the potential challenges to the American constitutional order, but you've also said that it can stand up to these challenges. Can you elaborate about that a little bit more? How can it stand up to this, and why does it need defending if it can?
Well, first of all, there is a real national government for the first time. There's a president who is, in fact, who looks a little bit like a monarch because he has, in some ways, the role of a monarch. He is the presider, but he's also the head of state. We have Constitution makes reasonably clear what powers lie with the federal government, which powers remain with the states. So we invent federalism, and this is a way to make a huge country that where to say that it's governed by the people is not a myth. It's not a falsehood. Because most of the things that matter to people in the places where they live, voters are in control of those things, and the federal government, until quite recently, is more or less out of the picture. So that's a kind of arrangement, a federal arrangement that is unique.
Yeah, but you also wanted to know why it's deteriorated,
Well, I mean,
right? If it didn't
Federalism,
deteriorate,
for
we
its-
wouldn't have a book.
Right.
Yeah.
What-
Yeah,
who
why
needs a
read this
on-
book? Why
to
write
celebrate
this
the
book?
Constitution if everything is hunky-dory, right? But things are not hunky-dory, right? And the decline is something largely a 20th century decline. I mean, there was the terrible crisis of the 19th century, and we lost 750,000 men solving that one. But then in the 20th century, and there's a whole chapter in our book about constitutional critics that goes all the way back to the anti-federalists, but features the abolitionists, Bellamy.
Bellamy,
What's
the
his
Utopian,
first- I forgot his first
Edward Bellamy,
Henry
the
Bellamy.
Utopians.
Henry Bellamy.
Yeah,
Henry Bellamy, I always want to say
Ed-
Walter Bellamy because he was a great center for the
Edward-
New York Knicks.
Edward Bellamy.
But we do put a lot of blame on the progressives. They understood that the great challenge of modern political economy, and they didn't make a serious effort to think about how to deal with those problems within the constitutional grain. Right? They felt the Constitution was the enemy. Wilson is very clear on that. Crowley is very clear on that.
Right.
The problem is the Constitution. It doesn't allow popular will. And that theme of being averse to popular will runs through all the modern criticisms and has helped to pervert our institutions.
Well, if we need people to understand the benefits of the constitutional order, and one of the great problems today is that people don't, how do we turn that trend around? How do we keep our republic?
Right? How do we keep our republic? Well, first do no harm. So don't screw around with the Constitution. Things could be much worse. There's a lot of vitality and a lot of liberty in this country. And things could be worse. So that's the thing I would say first. And then the need is largely a destructive need. The federal government impinges on the states and localities to an absurd extent, and it does undermine any serious notion of civic life. The national government will tell local elementary schools how to organize their bathrooms. I mean, I'm just picking the most extreme example. So do no harm. Let the states do what the states are designed to do. The Constitution gives the states what we call the police power, right, which is a bad, not the right word for modern times. This isn't just about cops, right? This is about most of the things that create the fabric of actual life. Marriage law, land use, education above all. Well, that needs to be restored.
Yeah, the way we put it in the book is that, the federal government can put a man on the moon, but it can't improve reading scores in grade schools. We know this because they tried, both. They got the man on the moon, but they didn't increase reading scores. If you look at the chart from 1960 to whenever it was, 2004 or whatever, it's just like that. It's a flat. It's totally. It's a well-intentioned effort that totally failed. So the question is, why did it fail? Well, the answer is some things the federal government can do and some things it can't do. So the first step is to try to understand what kinds of things the federal government is constitutionally responsible for. That's number one. And number two, what kinds of things can it actually do well? We have a lot of data about what the federal government does because it does a lot. some of it works, some of it doesn't. So we came up with this notion of the constitutional grain, because it's an analogy from carpentry. You work with the grain, makes things not only more durable, but more attractive.
And if I can just add another dimension to this, there is something quite wonderful going on, and people in Washington know about it, and the rest of the country has no interest in this. But the really devastating way that administrative agencies legislate, that's what they do. I mean, that's bathrooms in elementary schools. Congress never did that. It's not in the statute. But this unholy alliance of administrative agencies and courts have legitimated it. Aspects of the implementation of the Civil Rights Acts have no basis in the statutes, but the important civil rights agencies essentially create law, and Congress is too feckless to do away with it. So what I'm loving is the way this court is intervening now, first in the West Virginia case, and now we look forward to this, what I think will be a significant modification, if not outright repudiation, of what's called the Chevron doctrine. This is, for some of you, the most important thing going on in American politics that you never heard of, right? Because the Chevron doctrine gives enormous autonomy, well, autonomy is not the real, enormous freedom to administrative agencies to make rules, and the only standard that the court was allowing for finding those rules excessive, the only standard was if it was a clear violation of the law. So I'm not putting that too elegantly, but pay attention to the Supreme Court here. These decisions, from my point of view, are the most important things the court is doing. I mean, all the controversy is about abortion and this and that, but this is about keeping the republic.
So we can't just turn back the clock. We can't go back to more robust federalism. The court can do something, but the administrative state, earlier Professor Landy called it the administrative octopus, which I like better than state, has so many tentacles today that we're probably not going to be able to just put it back in its box. No. So other than the court, are there any other public policy recommendations that you can give that might help us to maintain our republic?
Okay, I actually have another one, but I have to, I'm a scholar, I have to footnote Yuval Levin on this one. I didn't think of it, Dennis didn't think of it. He says, since the Congress is the most deeply troubled institution, and Dennis and I were we sat on the House floor, and I was in heaven. Right? Because the House of Representatives is the essence of our government. That's everything else is secondary to the House of Representatives. And Yuval has these interesting ideas. He and Phil Wallach developed this together, that put more authority back into the committees. First of all, merge the appropriations and the statutory committees together, because the statutory committees don't matter as much as the appropriations committees do. And let them focus on their areas of expertise, and I think, and take power away from the leadership. Right? The House of Representatives is not deliberating.
Right.
And, the deliberation takes place between a few leaders, right? When Pelosi was Speaker of the House, I'm not sure it took place between anybody beyond Nancy Pelosi, right? I mean, if Congress, this all goes back to Federalist 51, right? Because what Madison realizes the most important thing that will keep the separation of powers alive is that each body has to have institutional ambition for itself. So we can't have every congressman wanting to be president. We have to have a Congress that really tries to understand what its own institutional power is. And likewise, the executive doesn't have any problem dealing with its institutional power because it is now the apex of our system, and that's a problem. But by stressing taking more power away from the leadership, putting it in the committees, you might begin to, first of all, it's more productive of bipartisanship because the people on the committee, and particularly their staffs, really know stuff. And they're going to be tempted to talk to each other. So again, I think that's really important, but you have to read Yuval's book too. Read ours first.
Well, thank you very much. I could ask you questions all day. I miss grad school. But I want to give our audience a chance to ask them as well. The professors have asked that when you ask a question, you introduce yourselves because they would like to get to know you. So if you could say
not
your,
just your name, like tell us who you are.
like your affiliation. So if you just want to raise your hands, we can go from there. Mr. Lucchese.
Hi there, I'm Mike Lucchese. I'm an alumnus of the Hudson Political Studies program. I did it in 2017, and now I'm a communications consultant. I take your points about things that the courts can do and things that Congress can do to sort of restore some of the system's constitutionalism. I'm also curious, though, about what the president can do. I think that we sometimes think that the administrative state, because it's an executive body, has to do with the imperial presidency. But there are some scholars, Don Devine, for instance, at the Fund for American Studies, who argue that the administrative state actually sort of disempowers the person of the president. And I'm wondering, is there something that the president or the White House can do to rein in some of these administrative agencies? Thank you.
Well, they would have to, first of all, be aware of this problem. And that will take a while. I don't think, well, thinking about the recent cycles of presidential candidates, none of them seem to have any interest in the constitutional grain. And I think we could just go back and back and back and back until we bumped into a president about whom you could say they really take the Constitution seriously. So that's the first problem. And until that becomes an issue in presidential campaigns, and the press can make it an issue, scholars can make it an issue, people can raise their hand and ask a question about, this, what you just said is very interesting. Is it constitutional or not? Have you ever thought about that? I'd love to hear somebody stand up and ask that question at a presidential press conference. So it's a process of trying to get people to think differently. And this is what teaching does. This is what we do as teachers. We try to get our students to think differently from the way they do now, clarifying things, making it clear that you don't have choices A through F. You have choices A through C. That's what the real world is. And so you have to think clearly about what kinds of things you want to emphasize, what virtues do you want to empower, what vices do you want to restrict. There's an awful lot of ways of reforming government, but there's a lot of questions you have to clarify for yourself first.
Can I add a little? Yes. So I'm going to deal with the presidency as your question demanded. Trump has really played a negative role in a serious discussion about the administrative octopus, right? Because if you just call it the swamp, that's not serious. There are real problems there, but his rhetoric and most of his terrible actions were subverted by his subordinates. This is a kind of a beautiful thing, although it should trouble us, I suppose, as small d Democrats. The president can't act because his subordinates think he's acting in a terrible way. So the debate about this thing is difficult, and there is, though, a more serious partisan divide. I am not a Republican, but on this issue, the Democrats don't really have any trouble with the administrative octopus. It's doing just what they want it to do. And, think since 220, has Biden ever complained about an administrative action? He finally pulled the plug on banning menthol cigarettes. Right? I think that was the FDA, right? Let's ban menthol cigarettes. And he did a little vote counting, and he understands African Americans predominantly smoke menthol cigarettes, and he did away with it. But even the EPA's decision that by 2032, 50% of the fleet of American automobiles has to be electric, right? So I would say in its current incarnation, the Democratic Party has no serious problem with the administrative octopus. And I hope the Republicans can mount a more judicious way of doing some creative destruction.
Mr. Fortier?
John Fourier, AEI, and graduate of Boston College, so used to hang out with the two of these people. Wanted to ask you about other alternatives. I mean, you're worried about keeping our republic, but there have been other constitutional alternatives. Some of the critics of our Constitution wanted more of a parliamentary system, less interested in separation of powers. We have those kind of governments in other parts of the world, in Europe. Maybe you could look at the state governments at the time of the founding, which were much more legislative supremacy. Maybe that's another option. Are there other big constitutional options that would help us respond to these troubles more than ours, or are they having the same problems?
This would be the absolute worst time to have a constitutional convention. And I fear that this movement in the states is going to get us there. I hope it stalls, because this is not the time to have a constitutional convention. However, it would be helpful if more politicians were willing to talk about the dangers of simple majority rule, because majorities change from week to week, and you cannot have a stable government if the majority of the day gets to pull the plug on what the majority of last week did. There's a kind of impatience among the public, or some sectors of the public. We want to be able to do what we want to do, and we want to be able to do it right now. And here's an opinion poll that shows that we have 55% of the public believes that agrees with us, right? So why can't we just do it? Well, the Constitution is in the way, because the Constitution specifies how you make laws, and it doesn't say you can make them in 2 or 3 days, right? It has to be a deliberative process. It has to be, it has to be consistent with the Constitution. There's an awful lot of obstacles in the way of majority rule. That's what it was intended to be. And I think Democrats in particular, and I think if they got what they wanted, they would eventually regret it, have convinced themselves that simple majority rule is really a really good idea. And the problem with the Constitution is it stands in the way of simple majority rule.
Oh, can I add to that? So I'm gonna discuss the worst relatively popular idea for improving our political system, and that's proportional representation, which is simply a dreadful idea. And I'm a very loyal supporter of Israel, but Israel has the worst government in any Republican country. Why? Because the way they structure the proportional representation, a small group of lunatics have the veto power. Right? You think Netanyahu really wants to do all these things that Ben-Gvir wants him to do? No, but that's how you get the votes. The virtue of a two-party system is that it encourages compromise within the parties. And the reason that our two-party system remains intact, more or less, is that we do first past the post. One person win. If you want to beat the incumbent, you have to beat him. You don't have to get a certain number of votes and then, make a common cause with the vegetarians or the evangelicals or whoever else you want to make a common cause with. Now, first past the post is not in the Constitution. So this isn't exactly a constitutional reform. It can be done in ordinary politics. But see, that there's such a kind of unwillingness to think about what creates a healthy politics. Right, when people advocate proportional representation, it's because it gives more voice to people, right? You don't have to be if you're a Republican, you don't have to be in the same party with, you're a libertarian Republican, you wouldn't have to be in the same party with the MAGAs, right? Have your own. And exactly how will that create a stable system of choice, which is what makes our democracy so great? You really, if you're in the outs, you can beat the guys in and in a more or less, have a more or less coherent majority yourself.
Mr. Halikius?
Great, thanks. I'm Dimitri Halikius.
You are Dimitri.
Yeah,
I thought
yeah.
you were Dimitri.
I am.
I have to talk to you afterwards.
Yeah, all right. So I'm a graduate student at Harvard for one more week, I suppose.
You have a job.
I have a job, yes, I have a job. Anyways, so I fully agree with what you just said, the criticism of proportional representation, but in a funny way, that is the kind of objection that the progressives were making against the Madisonian pluralistic congressional scheme we had in the late 19th century. Yeah. And your proposal, for example, of giving more power to the committees or the subcommittees, that was what they had in the late 19th century, and they said, what have we done here? We've given veto points to all of these obscure people who are beholden to special interests or corrupt, straightforwardly being bought off on important pieces of legislation. And so the case for discipline in the Congress, the case for presidentialism that the progressives offered was precisely because there were too many pathologies built into a system of leaderless government when we had that kind of congressional scheme. And so, there's something romantic and attractive, I think, about restoring legislative primacy, but when you look at the caliber of the people being elected to the Congress, it doesn't seem like they would be very capable of governing in an especially responsible manner, and it looks like we would reproduce a lot of those same pathologies that the progressives were resisting in the first place.
And you're going to defend the caliber of people we elect to the presidency? Do you want to? I'm sorry, I'm clogging the floor. You want to?
Well, the question about the committees is really a question about trying to get the committees to do the work of legislation instead of grandstanding and giving speeches all the When committees were specialized, and members of the Congress were therefore also specialized. They stayed on the same committee for a long time, which means they learned an awful lot about this thing they were supposed to know about. And so when you decouple that kind of knowledge, or the requirement for that kind of knowledge, from the authority that you have as a member of Congress, the result is irresponsible behavior. So I would like to see the Congress get back to the job of crafting legislation and learning how to do it properly. That would probably attract more candidates who are less like, roll off the names from both parties of grandstanders and, microphone hogs.
I would add one thing. There's one part of the committee system that that I think none of the advocates for that position would want to return to. Not seniority. Right? Seniority is just too anti-democratic a principle, and it keeps dinosaurs in power. No, the committees elect their chairs. And I think you'd get rid of a lot of the bad side of committee government and keep the good side.
Yeah.
The gentleman in the bow tie.
Well, look, we got lots of good questions. This is so good.
Okay, that's good. The gentleman in the bow tie. Okay,
Who are you?
I'm Michael Langer.
Okay.
How are you?
How are you? What's your affiliation, Michael?
I lead a nonprofit. I'm an ordained minister.
Oh.
Yeah. So I will apologize because I haven't read the book yet. My book list is very long right now.
Shorten it.
However, you talked about this idea of grandstanding, and I think one of you mentioned Yuval Levin. And his book, I don't know if you were talking about A Time to Build, but in that book, he makes
It's a new book. It's not out.
That's on my desk.
It's not out yet.
Well, it's on my
read it
my
because I'm reviewing
Goodreads,
it.
whatever. So in A Time to Build, he talks about the fact that the issue we're having right now, with whatever form of government we have, primarily the constitutional form right now, is that the both the government, your education, the church, the press, all of these things used to participate in the formation of virtue, and in the prospering of virtue, and they have all moved, quite decidedly so, to performance, as opposed to virtue formation. And I suppose my question is, how do you keep a republic together when the foundation of that republic was generally agreed upon that we were going to have a virtuous society that agreed on the overall virtues of good and what goodness was, and didn't foresee a society in which no one agreed on what those were and whether or not they even existed at all?
Do you want to go first?
Well, I see I understand the point you're making. I think you're exaggerating a little bit. If all you do is read the newspapers and watch TV, you'd think virtue has disappeared entirely from the planet, not just from the United States. But I don't think that that's actually a true picture of the American population. I can't prove this with facts and figures. I just don't want to leap from what you see on television to the real world, because I think the real world is a little more complicated than that. But yes, you cannot have a free country without virtuous citizens. So how do you create virtuous citizens? Well, you don't establish a religion, first of all. That's not going to work. There were 15 major religions in the United States at the time of the Constitutional Convention. Our teacher, Kerry McWilliams, always told us that Tocqueville was always right. And Tocqueville was not always right. He predicted that Americans would all become Catholics because the Catholic Church was an egalitarian institution. You have somebody at the top, but everybody else is equal. Instead, we got, 17 different Protestant denominations, and this sort of vigorous kind of Protestant politics has been with us for a long time. Obviously, it's still with us. All right, go ahead. You have something to say about this.
Yeah, the great text in America on this topic is Washington's farewell address. He said he differed from Madison, particularly the kind of music of Federalist 10, different factions beating up on each other. No, he said that to keep this he was in some ways the seminal person in the reason we have a Constitution. So he obviously loved the Constitution, but he said, this republic relies on virtue. And virtue is intimately related with the quality, the character of our education, but even deeper than the education imperative is religion. Right? I think he would be very disturbed at the decline of religious life in this country. And if we can't resuscitate religion, we better find some functional alternative. And I don't know what it is.
The gentleman in the jacket right there, yes, you.
Hale here from Governing Magazine. How do you feel that Dobbs' decision works with your theories of keeping the republic?
The which decision?
The Dobbs decision.
Dobbs decision.
The Dobbs decision?
Is it consistent? Are they consistent?
I have a position.
You go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, as a matter of prudence, I oppose the Dobbs decision. As a matter of principle, I support the Dobbs decision. This is a matter for the police power of the states. We have no consensus in this country. It turns out we actually have more than we thought we had, and we only learned that through state elections. But it seems to me this is such a profound issue, and I don't think we want to go to war over it. I know people on both sides that would like to go to war on the question of abortion, and it's, I think, a morally extremely ambiguous issue. So 50 states, let them do it. Let them make their decision.
If I was on the Supreme Court, I would have voted that way because this happens all the time. We confuse what a court case is about. A court case is not about, is abortion a good thing? No, it's about, is the right to abortion located in the Constitution? And the answer is, well, no, it isn't.
It's in the police powers of the states.
So it's up to the states because that's who does this kind of legislation.
As a matter of prudence, I would have been with Roberts. As a matter of prudence, I would have been with Roberts in, 12 weeks, because I knew this would just raise such a hornet's nest. But as a matter of principle, I guess I'm with Dennis. I am with Dennis. I'm not guessing.
Progressive, in any sense, it's been an advantage for the progressive side.
Yeah, give him a microphone. He isn't quiet.
Sorry. It's been an advantage for the progressive side in ways that it's just hard to deny. So one can take the position that intellectually they support the Dobbs decision and politically they think it has created lots of opportunities that wouldn't have existed otherwise for progressive politics.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Hoffarth?
Oh, no.
Professors Alexander Hoffarth, former Boston College alumnus and former alumnus of the previous iteration of the Hudson Political Studies program. As tempting as it would be to ask you a question about the presidency, I'm going to set that aside and go a different direction. If you had written this book a decade ago, when I just graduated from Boston College, the relevance of the book would still be there. The threats to the Constitution would still very much be relevant and serious, but mostly would be coming from the left. If we fast forward in the last decade, you've seen more criticism to the constitutional order coming from the right. Patrick Deneen, Sohrab Armani.
He thinks he's
Down.
on the left, Patrick.
Well, we can debate this, but Trump, Deneen, Adrian Vermeule, there have been a number of criticisms that from some that would argue would be coming from the right. I'd be interested in how that complicates, if at all, your analysis here when you're getting sort of a double flanked attacks to the Constitution rather than critiques sort of from a Wilsonian tradition.
Give us a little capsule of what Vermeule is. I know what Deneen says, but as I say, he would like to pretend he's on the left. So what particular things, Vermeule probably is the most articulate critic
That's
from the
debatable.
right.
If you've read his
Critic
book.
from the right, that I know. Maybe you know
But
better.
I think the criticism here is that the view for the Constitution should be, all the branches should be oriented towards the common good. We can debate, of course, what the common good is, but his view is on that. So he's critical of course,
okay.
the Federalist Society,
Oh, you got me
textualism,
going. National
regionalism.
conservatism. That's
That-
how
I mean, you could look at
that's
it-
how I conceive of
This is
it.
like saying the sun should shine all the time, right?
What did you say?
It's like saying the sun ought to shine all the time. Well, it's not going to shine all the time. People are going to have different understandings of what conservatism means in the context of constitutional law, constitutional design. At the moment, I think that progressives are encouraged by the opinion polls, by the fact that progressives control so much of the media, so much of the culture, so much of Hollywood, so much of everything, that they sense that this is their moment and the goddamn Constitution is in the way. So let's get rid of it.
I share some sensibility with the National Conservatives. For my sins, because I'm a fanatic Patriots fan. I started to watch the Brady roast, and it was the most disgusting thing I've seen. And the idea that children might be watching these unutterably dreadful, vulgar, so-called jokes. Occasionally, one or two were funny. Don't get me wrong, but I had a kind of impulse toward Vermeule and Demuth. Yeah, you know. Ban obscenity. Yeah, let's do it. Let's just ban obscenity. But they don't understand what holds this country together. We have very diverse views on these matters. These are matters for people to discuss over Thanksgiving dinner. They can discuss it in church. They can discuss it in PTA meetings. I mean, I think it's rather exciting what's happening at the local level with these increasingly controversial PTA, not just PTA meetings, but serious school board meetings.
School board meetings, right.
A wonderful student of mine, Carol Downey, is the expert on this. She writes for the National Review. She does great work.
Yeah, Carol knows.
But the idea that we're going to have national censorship, I mean, all the things I distrust about the national government and that they should distrust, they want to elevate into a kind of commissariat. I have to say that.
Deneen actually, I think, sometimes talks as if he hopes it might be possible to establish Catholicism as the national religion.
Yeah, there's that too.
Which means he's completely smoking dope.
No, I mean, we really do care about civil liberties. We really do want to accommodate diversity of outlook. Maybe some people didn't find that roast as reprehensible as I did, even though I love those guys. Those are my guys. Anyway, I said enough.
We have time for two more questions, Mr. Walters and then Mr. Villas.
Well, thank you. These are issues that when you work in Washington, as long as I've worked, and you try to work on policy now, they're critical to try to understand how are the institutions functioning and how do we get, I mean, we can all sit in an office and think up ideas, but they don't make any difference if we can't convince real elected officials and the public that supports them to work. I can't tell, though, I mean, you try to say what caused what if you want to counter certain forces or cause change. I still can't tell from your presentation whether the cause that's deepest in this disruption problem, animosity toward the Constitution, is in the body politic, because you talked about decline of religion, civic education, other things like that, whether that's in the people themselves, which is a different issue from the institutions, or whether it's a distortion of the institutions in a way that you can make Congress work and then the problem becomes more manageable or other kinds of things. Because one of them may be easier than the other to try to repair. But I'll give you one example that I've been struck by since I thought about Washington. When I came to work for the ancient days of the Reagan administration in our memory, people used to give speeches in the cabinet members about policy. I worked for Bill Bennett. He gave a number of speeches about education reform, about standards, about things like that. And they were covered, widely covered. There were op-eds in the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and the New York Times about bilingual education, about maintaining character through the schools and what they should do. But the same thing happened in defense and state and treasury and other things. Nobody gives speeches like that now. And that's not just this administration, it's the previous administration. And going parallel to that, because that used to be an effort to try to inform the American people or those who care to be informed about why an administration is proposing things and try to marshal public support, or it was sometimes corrected by a lack of public support. What we've had also happen now is a rise of rule by executive order, decrees from the president written by lawyers saying, because I have powers that are here, I can just change things. Like, I can forgive student debt, billions of dollars, no appropriation, no legal, but again, all kinds of things have been done. You've touched on some of the other ones. So consent of the governed is receding into the background, but part of that seems to be a result of the problem of the governed accepting the fact that they're becoming subjects and not citizens. And so I guess I've got to ask you, when I read Yuval's book, the earlier one referred to, I too thought, well, okay, interesting diagnosis, but his kind of conclusion is join an institution, which I don't think is going to fix the problem here.
So who's this?
Yuval Levin's book.
Yuval.
Yeah.
Yuval's doing better. See, I get an advanced copy of the book because I'm reviewing it.
Yeah, okay. This
judge
is the new book. I'm talking about the old
The
book.
institution's book does not.
But what is the cause? And before, I mean, if we're going to properly confront the problem, we have to get to the old philosophical question of causes. And I'm not quite sure I understand your view about whether the cause is in ourselves or in our institutions or in the current leaders. I don't know.
Well, you know, public opinion is a mixed bag, as you know, and there are a lot of people who don't think very much about what's going on in the government, and but there are a lot of people who are, you know, who seem to be concerned, sort of worried about what is the drift here. It seems as if something is different now. The language, the kinds of things that the federal government does, you know, these dear colleague letters, here's what you have to do to reform your public school, signed to the president. There has been a kind of, it's not an earthquake, it's not a seismic shift. It's a gradual drift in the direction of rule by administrators. And I think to some degree the Trump phenomenon is a response to that realization. All the talk about the deep state, for example, well, you know, some of this is exaggerated, but it's not made up. The administrative state is deep because it has so much power, it reaches very far, and much of what it does is invisible to most voters until the results show up. So we're at this moment, and I think this is, we both sense this is why we write this book. We're at a moment where it would help if people could think seriously about what constitutional government actually means and how it can be conducted and why it's worth defending.
Yeah, so. Is the problem in our culture or in our institutions? Yes. Right? I mean, we deal with the institutions because we actually think we know something about them. And what some serious way, this isn't just echoing Dennis here, right? Some serious ways of thinking about a constitutional order. But the culture, I mean, I gave you my Brady roast example, but TikTok, I mean, this is a matter for, I think, especially parents. Parents love their children. Most parents I know love their children. Do they give them unlimited access to TikTok? Do schools really have to let students keep cell phones in class because they might get a call that their mother's having a heart attack? Come on. This is nonsense, but this is from the grassroots, right? We didn't write a book about this because we don't know the answers, not because we underestimate the problem.
Last question, Mr. Villasma.
That guy's, in the back, good.
Howdy, thank you.
Who are you?
JP. I'm a former Hudson Fellow last year. I write for The Spectator, and I'm at Georgetown grad school. So first of all, I want to say Togol's always right. Maybe the timing is not correct, but the Catholic population has increased 3 to 6% every single year since 1965.
Well,
and all the people in your question were Catholic. Maybe that has something to do with it. Anyhow, back to my question. This is a bit polemical, naturally so. But a lot of the talk about defending our constitutionality has clearly focused on structures or like organisms in government and so on. And when I look at American history, what becomes clear is that we've actually had many situations of the president ignoring the courts, legislative actions that defy the ethos of constitutionality. We've had periods of growth and degrowth of government structures, but what we have not seen is such rapid demographic religious change. And it's, I guess, my question is, when the founders talked about the principles, they also talked about that cohesion, blue laws, Bible in schools and all those things. Is there ever a case to use illiberal mechanisms to advance liberal goals? Because it seems like our founders, in some regard, did believe that.
to use illiberal means to achieve liberal goals.
Yes.
Liberal goals.
Liberal goals.
Yes.
Well, I'm not sure why using illiberal means would produce liberal goals.
I mean,
Why does that work?
you've got to say more. The question is a little opaque.
So like let's say like blue laws are like how we conceive of them today would be like deeply illiberal, but they were meant to like allow for a population with the right inclinations that would then protect.
How about
such
sumptuary laws? Those would be good too. I think, right? I think the police power really gives a great deal of flexibility to states and localities to consider moral issues, and a certain kind of blue law could be passed.
Oh, they have.
I probably might not approve of all of them. Vermeule would, but I think it's crucial to say that at the national level, we don't want blue laws. because the national government, as Dennis said with his example of improving math scores, simply is out of its depth. And that is because we do love the principle of limited national government. That's the heart of our Constitution. And it seems to me it serves us very well to, these matters have to be pushed down. If a city wants to ban, what am I thinking of? Drag queen, drag events that allow children. I think a community could do that. But I don't want the national government doing it.
Yeah, that's the police power.
It's the police power. It's
health
such a great idea, and it's not understood.
The regulation of the health, welfare, and morals of the people. When I first moved to Massachusetts, you couldn't buy liquor on Sunday. I didn't like that. You run out of vodka on Saturday, and then you can't get it on Sunday. Well, eventually, people like me changed the law. There was a referendum, and we got rid of Sunday closing laws. The state overrode them all over the state, all at the same time. Now, there's a problem with that. I like having the liquor stores open on Sunday, but what I like even more is local options for communities. And Massachusetts has always been like this, but it's getting less and less as time goes on. Local communities get to decide a whole lot of things for themselves. This is a long tradition in Massachusetts. Progressives don't like it, but everybody else does, and so it continues. And so that's I'm just trying to give you an example of, the real difference between what a national government is for and what a state and local governments are for.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but don't worry if you didn't get to ask your question. We don't have vodka, but we do have wine and cheese out, and we don't have a Thanksgiving dinner, but we can continue to argue over our reception out there. Please join me in thanking Professors Marc, Landy, and Dennis Hale.